Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you're in the quiet halls and muddy fields of medieval Europe, walking the long, slow path of a knight, where castles rise from stone, the clatter of hooves echoes on cobblestones, and the weight of armour presses gently against your shoulders. You're not a noble lord or a famed warrior, just an ordinary knight drifting through the rhythms of duty, training, and daily life. Before we start, do me one small favour. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you prefer these stories without ads, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you want the ultimate immersive experience, consider using a pair of wireless earbuds. They're comfortable, discreet, and designed so you can wear them even while sleeping. I've linked my favourite pair, plus other sleep tools, in the description. Now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You begin where most stories pretend not to, in the quiet margins of childhood, where ambition doesn't feel like ambition at all. It feels like standing barefoot on cold stone floors at dawn, rubbing the sleep from your eyes while someone older than you decides that you should become something impressive. You don't question it. Children rarely do. The world seems made of decisions already carved by other hands, and you simply step into the grooves worn before you. You remember the earliest mornings most clearly. Not for their brightness. Those were dim years, lit mostly by rushlight and cloudy windows, but for the stillness. The household stirred slowly, with more groans than words. You always rose earlier than you wished, tugged awake by a sense of duty that didn't yet have a name. The air was cool, smelling of damp wood and yesterday's ashes. Even now, as you think back, you can almost feel that chill brushing across your arms, like an old habit returning. Being a page was less a title and more an apprenticeship in the small inconveniences of noble life. You were taught to fold cloth with unnecessary precision, to carry a cup without spilling it, even when your hands trembled, to stand still, while adults argued about matters you understood only through tone. Every mistake brought a correction, not harsh, not cruel, just constant like water wearing down a stone. You learned quickly that most of knighthood was repetition, doing the same task until the body understood it better than the mind. Some days you swept the same corridor twice, not because it needed it, but because someone thought you needed it. You ran errands that led nowhere in particular. You memorized verses from books whose pages smelled faintly of mildew. You learned how to wait. Waiting, in fact, became your first real skill. Waiting for instructions, for meals, for approval, for adulthood. In those days, time moved like a heavy cart on an uneven road, creaking forward inch by inch. Your instructors liked to speak of glory, though they offered little evidence of having seen any themselves. They held their stories like relics, polished, fragile, and slightly suspicious. When they spoke, their voices assumed a reverent tone, as if knighthood were a kind of earthly sainthood. Yet their eyes betrayed a softer, more tired truth. You didn't understand that then, of course. You only knew that the stories were exciting in a distant, unreachable way. Bright banners, gleaming armour, noble quests, and triumphant returns, the sort of things that happen to other people. What you did understand was the weight of expectation, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet, persistent pressure that seeps into a household. People looked at you and saw a future you hadn't chosen. They spoke of lineage, honour, service, each word settled onto your small shoulders like invisible mail. You carried it because you thought that was simply what one did. There were moments of warmth among the monotony. The kitchen, always warmer than the rest of the manor, offered brief comfort. Bread rising in the oven filled the air with a softness the world rarely matched. The cooks moved around you with gentle impatience, muttering about the day's work, while pushing a leftover crust into your hands. Hunger has a way of making even simple food feel like reward. You ate those crusts quickly, feeling for a moment as though you belonged somewhere. Outside, the castle yard became your true classroom. It was muddy in spring, dusty in summer, frozen in winter. Only in autumn did it resemble anything pleasant. You carried messages, fetched equipment, and grew accustomed to the sharp tang of metal and the earthy musk of horses. The stable hand, a quiet man with shoulders as broad as a gate, became one of your earliest mentors, not in knighthood, but in observation. "If you want to understand someone," he once murmured while brushing down a stallion, "watch how they treat their horse." You didn't grasp the wisdom immediately. Years later you would. You practiced small movements, lifting a wooden sword, balancing your stance, pulling a bowstring until your fingers burned. No one praised you for these things. Praise, you learned, was reserved for heirs and champions, not for children still learning how to keep their footing. But you kept practicing because something in you insisted on it. Perhaps it was pride or stubbornness, or simply the desire to prove that the expectations placed upon you were not misplaced. Your body grew accustomed to discomfort. It learned to accept bruises as part of the scenery, to endure the stiffness that settled in your limbs each morning. By the time you reached the age to become a squire, you were no stronger than other youths, but you were more resigned to the demands of training. Resignation, though rarely celebrated, is one of the quiet pillars of knighthood. The transition to squirehood came not with ceremony, but with a simple instruction delivered over a meal. "You'll serve Sir Aldric from now on." Sir Aldric, a man who carried more scars than expressions, regarded you with a brief nod. His approval was not something he bestowed freely. You understood at once that you had been given not a mentor, but a measure. His presence alone seemed to test you. Serving a knight was less glamorous than you imagined. You cleaned his gear, tended his horse, mended torn straps, and polished armor until your reflection stared back at you through a distorted sheen. You learned that armor never truly shines. It only pretends to, under the right light. Leather stiffens, chain rusts, clasps loosen. Maintenance became another quiet ritual. One more repetition in a life already heavy with them. Travel with Sir Aldric exposed you to the world beyond your manor's walls. Rolling fields, small villages, forests, thick with the scent of pine and damp soil. None of it felt like the grand world described in legends. It was simpler, more ordinary, and far more indifferent. People lived, worked, and aged without concern for the ambitions of knights or the ideals of chivalry. Their lives moved to rhythms older and steadier than yours. You watched Sir Aldric interact with these people, farmers, merchants, priests, widows, children, and noticed how his tone shifted with each one, not out of manipulation, but adaptation. A knight, you realized, is an actor in a play that never ends, adjusting lines depending on the audience. You studied him not because you admired him, but because you understood that your future required this mimicry. Sometimes he offered advice you didn't ask for. "Honor is heavier than armor," he muttered once, while tightening his gauntlet, "and it rusts faster." You weren't sure whether he meant it as a warning or a confession. Perhaps he didn't know either. Nights on the road introduced you to a different kind of stillness. The world after sunset felt larger, as though darkness stretched the horizon outward. You lay beneath the sky, watching stars tremble in the cold air, each one far away and uninterested. The fire crackled quietly, throwing sparks upward like brief thoughts trying to escape. You felt small, but not uncomfortably so. Smallness made the world seem less demanding. As months turned into years, the tasks you once performed clumsily became part of your instincts. You learned how to adjust a saddle so it wouldn't chafe after hours of riding. You learned the rhythm of sharpening a blade until the edge whispered against the whetstone. You learned how to keep your breath steady when exhaustion tried to take control. Skill arrived slowly, almost reluctantly, like a guest, unsure if it was invited. Through it all, ambition followed you like a faint shadow. Not the fiery ambition of songs, but the quieter kind. The desire to fulfill what you were told you should become. You didn't chase greatness. you simply didn't want to fail. And in that simple, unremarkable motivation lay the true shape of your road to knighthood. When you look back now, the path seems both long and strangely narrow. Every step guided by hands you barely remember, every choice shaped by customs older than your family's name. You walked it because it was the road placed beneath your feet, dusty, uneven, and unavoidable. And as you breathe in the memory of that early journey, you feel again the mix of weariness and resolve that carried you forward. Not toward glory, but toward a life built quietly, piece by piece under the patient weight of expectation. A road you never chose, but learned to follow with measured, deliberate steps. You step inside the great hall the way you once stepped into adulthood, quietly, cautiously, as though the air itself carries expectations you might disturb. The transition from the road to this dim interior is subtle, like a long breath drawn in and held without thought. Outside, the world stretches open. Inside, it folds in on itself, gathering into shadows beneath high beams, darkened by centuries of smoke. The hall has always been the heart of noble life, though heart feels too lively a word for a place that beats only out of obligation. The rafters loom above you like ancient ribs, their edges softened by dust and history. You can never tell if that faint scent drifting down from them is from old fires or from the secrets that have seeped into the wood over time. Everything here holds a memory, sometimes spoken, more often swallowed. Your steps make little sound on the stone floor, but you feel the subtle give of rushes underfoot. New rushes were laid not long ago, woven with dried lavender to disguise the musty odour that always settles along the edges of the room. No matter how often the floors are cleaned, that smell persists. It clings to the cracks between stones, the quiet corners behind benches, the dim recesses beneath the dais. You've long understood that castles are less fortresses than they are repositories of scents. Smoke, sweat, bread, wool, and something faintly metallic, like old coins no one remembers spending. At the far end of the hall, near the high table, the hearth burns with steady resignation. Flames rise and fall in a rhythm that doesn't care who watches. The logs sputter occasionally, sending sparks drifting upward like brief arguments that no one pursues. Heat radiates outward in soft waves, warming your front while leaving your back cold. A small reminder that comfort, even here, arrives unevenly. Men and women gather in pockets throughout the hall, speaking in low tones. You recognize many of them. Lords with their well-practiced stillness, ladies whose expressions reveal nothing but polite interest, stewards carrying more responsibilities than titles. Their clothes rustle softly when they move, wool brushing linen, fur brushing wool, each texture contributing to the quiet orchestra of mundane power. You weave through them as if navigating a forest where every tree leans slightly inward. Each conversation drifts past you, muted by distance and discretion. No one announces their intentions here. Nobles speak the way they breathe, softly, carefully, aware that even walls listen. A pair of older knights stand near one of the pillars, their armour stacked neatly on the bench beside them. Without the weight of steel, they appear smaller, more human. One runs his thumb along the rim of a cup, nodding occasionally as his companion mutters something, half wry, half resigned. Their laughter is brief, the exhaustion beneath it unmistakable. You've come to recognise that sound, the laughter of men who know the cost of doing what they're expected to do. Further along, two young nobles lean over the table, studying a map stretched taut by small iron weights. Their whispered debate circles around lands neither of them will ever truly rule. You've heard such murmurings before, the cautious hopefulness of men who believe that lines on parchment determine the shape of their lives. It's a gentler illusion than most, and perhaps kinder for being fragile. As you approach the hearth, warmth settles over your hands. The fire crackles in a way that seems almost conversational, as if inviting you to sit and rest. You do, easing yourself onto a bench worn smooth by generations. Wood this old carries a certain patience. It accepts your weight without protest. From this vantage, you see the hall more clearly. The tapestries along the walls depict battles that happened so long ago they might as well be stories. The colours have faded in places, threads loosened by damp seasons, but the figures still stand in frozen triumph. Horses rearing, swords raised, banners streaming across imaginary winds. You find yourself studying the faces woven into the cloth. They are too perfect, too certain. Real faces never look like that in moments of danger. Real eyes carry hesitation, fear, and the stubborn instinct to survive. The artists never stitched those things into their work. A servant passes by carrying a tray of trenchers, the aroma of roasted meat trailing behind. His steps are steady, but you notice how he angles the tray ever so slightly to avoid brushing against the noble's years of practice, perhaps, or years of consequences. In halls like this, even the placement of one's elbow can determine how peacefully the night will end. You remember your first time stepping into a hall like this as a young squire. The noise overwhelmed you then. Laughter, clanking cups, loud boasts, spoken for the sake of being heard. Now you realise the noise was only loud because you didn't yet understand the subtleties. The real conversations were always the quiet ones, the murmured promises, the subtle exchanges of favours, the gentle shifts of allegiance that shaped more fates than any sword ever did. A group of nobles seated near the hearth draw your attention. They lean inward, forming a small circle of influence. One gestures subtly with his hand, describing events that will likely unfold in ways he doesn't predict. Another nods, though his eyes remain fixed on the flames. Promises drift between them like smoke, formless, fragile, easily carried away by the slightest change in wind. You suspect that most of these promises will dissolve into nothing long before the next harvest. That is the nature of noble agreements, spoken warmly, kept rarely. You glance toward the dais where the lord of the castle sits. His posture resembles that of a man carved from the chair itself. Upright, impassive, a little too still. He listens to an advisor who leans in with earnest intensity. The lord's expression never shifts. Power, you've learned, is often quiet because it can afford to be. Those who must shout are usually the ones scrambling to keep it. As you watch, a strange calm settles over you. Not contentment. Knighthood seldom offers that, but a sense of clarity. You understand now why so many men chase titles, land, renown. The Great Hall is designed to magnify those desires, to make ambition feel like part of the architecture. Every stone whispers about legacies, every beam promises the illusion of permanence, and yet everything here, for all its grandeur, feels temporary. Even the firewood burns down eventually. A soft clatter interrupts your thoughts, a cup slipping from someone's fingers and hitting the floor. Not loudly, just enough to turn a few heads. A servant rushes to collect the pieces, bowing repeatedly. No one scolds him. No one needs to. The hall itself carries its own expectations, and even the smallest mistake feels amplified beneath its shadowed rafters. You stand, letting the warmth slip away from your legs. As you walk past the benches, you feel the air shift. Cooler here, warmer there, depending on how close you are to the hearth or the draught leaking through narrow windows. The hall breathes in a slow, uneven rhythm. It reminds you of something ancient trying to stay awake. Near one of the support beams, a minstrel tunes his instrument. The strings hum faintly, searching for harmony. He's not here for entertainment. He's here to fill the silence that nobility always pretends not to notice. You catch the beginning of a melody, soft, wandering, unhurried. It floats upward, brushing the ceiling, before dissolving into the rafters. Music here is like everything else, gentle encouragement to forget whatever truth lies beneath the civility. You linger a moment longer, absorbing the weight of the hall. Its stone, its history, its quiet choreography of power. Being a knight means moving through these spaces as both participant and observer, caught between duty and detachment. You understand that more clearly now. In this place, decisions are made not with declarations, but with glances, pauses, and barely perceptible nods. When you finally turn toward the door, the hall seems to pull back slightly, like a tide withdrawing. You move through the archway and feel the air change, cooler, freer, carrying the faint scent of the courtyard beyond, behind you. The murmured voices continue, blending with the distant crackle of the hearth. Ahead lies the world where those whispered decisions take shape, slowly and inevitably. The hall stays behind, but its echoes follow you, settling into your thoughts with the steady patience of old stone. You leave the hall behind, but its murmurs follow you long after the doors close. They settle somewhere in your mind, shaping your thoughts without announcing their presence. The night air outside feels cooler than it should, the kind of cold that wakes memories you didn't plan to revisit. You walk across the courtyard, past the quiet stables and the embers of a dying torch, until the stillness carries you somewhere older, back to the moment when you were asked to kneel. The memory returns with the gentleness of a tide rather than the force of a wave. You don't choose to relive it, it simply rises to meet you, as if the weight of the world has decided to remind you how it first settled on your shoulders. You see the chamber again, stone walls softened by candlelight, a hush so deep it pressed against your skin, and the faint scent of incense curling upward like a thin prayer. None of it felt triumphant. It felt deliberate, solemn, inevitable. You remember the roughness of the floor beneath your knees? It was cold, slightly uneven, worn smooth by those who knelt before you. Stones like that carry the imprint of every vow given upon them, though they reveal nothing. You placed your hands together because someone told you to. Your head bowed not out of humility, but because the ritual demanded it. You were there to offer obedience, not interpretation. The knight standing before you held his sword with both hands. Its blade caught the candlelight, glinting in small, wavering arcs that made it seem alive. You noticed, even then, the scratches along the steel, thin lines that spoke quietly of past conflicts, of strikes deflected and blows sustained. It was not the pristine weapon you imagined a ceremonial blade would be. That alone told you more about truth than any speech could have. The blade touched your shoulder, lightly, gently, almost apologetically, and yet something in that small contact sank deep into you, like a seed dropped into fertile earth. It didn't weigh anything physically, but you felt its pressure all the same, a soft insistence that would stay with you long after you rose from the floor. Every vow has two sides, the one spoken aloud, and the one that echoes inside long after the words have faded. You were asked to swear loyalty, courage, honesty, mercy, the familiar pillars of chivalry, recited with a cadence older than memory. You repeated them because that was what one did. Your voice sounded steady, though your stomach felt tight, not from fear. Fear is too sharp a word. What you felt was something quieter, the unsettled sense that you were promising more than you understood. People describe vows as uplifting, noble, inspiring, but kneeling there, you sense the truth beneath the ceremony. Oaths are not wings. They are anchors. They hold you to ground you didn't choose, binding you to expectations that shift like sand. No one mentioned that part. Perhaps they believed you would discover it in time, or perhaps they expected you to learn as they had, quietly, privately, without protest. When you rose from the floor, you felt different in ways you couldn't name. Not stronger, not wiser, just attached, tethered to something invisible. The sword returned to its sheath, the candles flickered as if exhaling, and the small audience murmured their approval. Their faces blended into a kind of soft blur, the way people appear when they're present only for formality. You walked among them, accepting nods and clasped hands, but everything felt distant, as though you were standing slightly outside your own body. Later, when you stepped outside, the night greeted you with cool indifference. The sky stretched overhead, heavy with stars, none of which cared about your new title. You remember looking up and realizing how tiny your vow was compared to the vastness above you. And yet paradoxically, it felt heavier than anything you had ever carried. That heaviness followed you in the days that came after, not as dread, but as an awareness that clung to your thoughts like moisture. You felt it when you strapped on your armor, the buckles stiff from the morning cold. You felt it when your horse turned its head toward you, breath warm against your cheek, as if sensing the shift in your posture. You felt it in the hallways, the training yard, the chapel, the fields beyond the walls. Nothing around you changed, but you did, subtly, quietly, in a way only you could feel. Armor, for all its weight, is honest. It pulls at your shoulders, squeezes your ribs, leaves little red marks along your skin. You can point to the places where it burdens you. Oaths offer no such clarity. They settle into your bones, then wait. They shape your choices long before you realize they're doing it. Someone asks you for help, and you say yes because your vow said you must. Someone insults you, and you hold your temper because your vow said you should. Someone demands your service, and you obey because your vow left you no alternative. Armor may be heavy, but it can be removed. Oaths are more persistent. You learned this gradually through the small demands that accumulated in every corner of your life. A noble asking you to mediate a dispute, a villager requesting protection for a herd of sheep, a squire seeking correction for a poorly tied strap. Each request seemed harmless on its own, but together they formed a web of obligation that left no space untouched. Responsibility draped itself around you in layers, soft but suffocating, like wool blankets piled too high. You didn't resent it. Resentment requires sharpness, and your days dulled those edges. You simply accepted the weight, the way you accepted the cold, the mud, the tedium. A quiet endurance grew within you, the kind that doesn't demand praise or recognition. You carried yourself through each task with the same steady rhythm. Inhale, exhale, continue. What surprised you most in time was how easily oaths rust, not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly, almost politely. A promise made in candlelight begins to soften under the sun. A vow of mercy becomes complicated when mercy endangers others. A pledge of honesty shifts when truth threatens to unravel fragile alliances. Chivalry, you discovered, is less a code and more a suggestion, interpreted differently depending on the needs of the moment. You noticed this especially when travelling with seasoned knights. They carried their vows like patched cloaks, worn but still serviceable. Some had bent their oaths so gently that the distortions became invisible, except to those who looked closely. Others followed their vows with rigid precision that left little room for kindness. You saw honour held like a cherished relic, and honour treated like a bargaining token. The inconsistency unsettled you at first. Eventually you understood that vows are not upheld or broken in single moments. They erode, refine, shift in quiet increments. You felt the pressure of your own vows most keenly during moments of solitude. Standing watch at night, for instance, while the fire crackled beside you and frost crept along the edges of your cloak. In the silence, your thoughts moved freely. You wondered whether you were living up to the words you had spoken. You wondered whether anyone truly could, and you wondered, with a heaviness you rarely admitted, whether those words were ever meant to be lived literally. The truth whispered by experience is that ideals are easier to recite than to embody, and yet you keep trying, not because the world rewards such effort, but because something inside you refuses to give it up entirely. A stubborn spark, perhaps, or the lingering warmth of youthful belief. Whatever it is, it holds you to your vow even when the vow has frayed. As you walk now through the fading light, the memory of that ceremony lingers in your thoughts. You feel again the cool stone under your knees, the gentle tap of steel against your shoulders, the hush that seemed to suspend time. You can still hear your own voice, soft and uncertain, reciting the words that would shape your life. And you understand, more clearly than ever, that the ceremony was not the beginning. The beginning was the weight that settled on you afterward, the quiet, unspoken understanding that your life no longer belonged entirely to you. Oaths may rust faster than armor, but their marks remain long after the metal is gone. You remember the first time you stood before a full suit of armor, your own, waiting on its wooden rack like a silent and judgmental companion. Even now, the memory drifts back with the faint metallic smell of oiled steel and the quiet anxiety that pooled behind your ribs. You see the glint of torchlight running over the curves and plates, tracing every rivet, every hinge, every stubborn edge that would soon be pressing against your bones. It should have been a triumphant moment, the sort of scene a storyteller would embellish with heroic music and a proud parent wiping away a tear. But the truth was quieter, heavier, and entirely less comfortable. You step toward the armor in your mind's eye, feeling that familiar apprehension creep across your shoulders. The armor doesn't look like an extension of you. It looks like something that might swallow you whole. Knights always seem so seamless in their battles, their plates moving like skin, their visors flashing open with practiced ease. But standing there on that morning, you felt more like a child trying on a costume several sizes too stiff. The squire, assigned to assist you, no older than you had once been, waits patiently with the first pieces laid out. The padding comes first, the undergarment of quilting, meant to soften the iron's bite. When you pull it over your head, the fabric scratches your skin. It smells of wool, sweat, and the lingering ghosts of yesterday's exertion. No matter how many times it's washed, it carries the faint, permanent scent of someone who is always halfway between exertion and exhaustion. You tug at the sleeves, shifting the padding into place. Every thread feels slightly off. You think about how odd it is that people so often imagine armor as a clean, shining second skin, when the truth is that the part actually touching you is a damp, heavy hug from a garment that never dries fast enough. The squire asks you to lift your arms, and the padding bunches beneath your elbows in a way that makes you wonder who first decided this was the pinnacle of protective clothing. Then comes the metal. The breastplate is always heavier than you expect, even when you know its weight. When the squire lifts it toward your chest, the world seems to tilt forward with it. He clamps it around you with practiced hands, tightening the straps until your ribs feel caged. The edges pinch slightly beneath your arms, the rim pressing just a bit too close to your collarbone. You shift your shoulders, trying to settle into a position that doesn't feel like you're fighting a metal embrace meant for someone broader in some places and narrower in others. Armor is made to measure, they say, crafted to your body, but your body changes. Weight shifts, shoulders broaden, posture adapts. Metal does not. Metal stays stubbornly loyal to the shape you had the day the smith declared it finished. From that moment forward, it is you who must compromise. The backplate is next. When it locks into place with the front, you feel as though you've stepped into a shell. You breathe, and the metal reminds you that breath should be small, controlled, economical. Deep inhalations thud against the plates, and you feel the vibration travel along your spine. There is a strange comfort to this restriction, as though the armor is teaching you to occupy less space in the world, to make fewer unnecessary movements, to conserve your strength for the moments that demand it. The squire moves to the pauldrons, those broad shoulder plates that make knights look larger than life, or perhaps simply more intimidating. They tug at the straps, and you feel them settle, the weight pulling downward. The moment you lift your arm, the plates shift with a grinding whisper, and you're reminded that mobility is a privilege. Earned inch by inch, each motion becomes a negotiation between the limits of the design and the determination of your muscles. Your arms disappear beneath layers of steel, until only your fingers remain bare. The gloves come next, stiff leather, reinforced with plates, each finger moving with the reluctant grace of a puppet still learning its strings. You try to clench your fist. The motion is possible, but slow, as though your hand must ask permission from each joint. When the greaves and cuisses are strapped to your legs, your lower body becomes a puzzle of hinges and plates. Walking transforms into a deliberate, measured act. You take a step, and the armour responds half a beat behind you, like a companion trying to mimic your movements, but never quite getting the rhythm right. You step again, and the weight pulls you slightly off balance until your body adjusts, shifting into the familiar dance that comes from daily practice. You think about all the stories told of knights mounting horses with a single smooth motion, how children imagine it as a leap of elegance and grace. In reality, climbing into a saddle while wearing 60 pounds of steel requires strategy, patience, and usually a very sturdy stirrup. You remember the first time you attempted it? How the armour dragged you sideways, how you clung awkwardly to the saddle horn, how your horse flicked its ears as if questioning whether you were entirely worth the trouble. Even now, in the quiet recollection of that moment, you feel a flush of heat at the memory. Not shame exactly, just the recognition that so much of knighthood is learned through small embarrassments and long adjustments. The helmet is the last piece, and it changes everything. The moment the visor lowers, the world narrows. Sounds become muffled, filtered through layers of metal. Your breathing echoes faintly inside the confined space, a rhythmic reminder of your own vulnerability. Vision shrinks to a slit, turning the world into a painting framed in steel. You move your head, and the helmet shifts a fraction too late, as though it lags behind your thoughts. This is the moment people rarely understand. How isolating it feels. How the armour that protects you also separates you from everyone around you. Voices become distant. Faces blur. You exist inside a metal world that shares only what it chooses to reveal. Yet, as heavy, awkward and stubborn as the armour is, there's a strange familiarity that grows from it. Over time, the shifting plates become less of an obstacle and more of an unspoken agreement between you and the steel. You learn how to move within it, how to breathe with smaller breaths, how to read the world through narrowed slits without feeling trapped. You find a rhythm that belongs only to those who walk beneath this burden, a rhythm shaped by weight, discipline, and necessity. You remember stepping outside for the first time that day, fully armoured. The air felt cooler, sharper, as though it had to squeeze through the layers to reach you. Birds sounded distant, their calls muted through the metal casing around your ears, but the sun glinted off your plates, scattering light in small flashes, and for a moment the armour, your armour, felt like something you could learn to respect, not adore, not romanticise, but respect, because armour is not comfort, it is not glory, it is not the shining symbol poets claim it to be. Armour is a cage you teach yourself to move within. It is perseverance made visible. It is the weight that reminds you what it costs to stand where a knight must stand. And even now, as you walk through that memory, you feel again the cold iron against your skin, the pinch of an unyielding edge, the hum of metal following your heartbeat. You feel the weight settle around you like an old truth, unpleasant, unavoidable, and entirely your own. A mobile prison, yes, but also the clearest expression of what your life demanded: endurance, restraint, and the ability to carry burdens not meant to fit comfortably. You move forward in the memory, step by measured step, the armour shifting with you, always slightly too heavy, always slightly too tight, always undeniably yours. The memory comes to you slowly, carried on the faint scent of trampled grass and the dry rasp of morning air. It settles around you with the quiet certainty of routine, the kind that begins before sunrise and ends only when your body reminds you it has limits. You feel the ground beneath your boots, packed earth, uneven from countless strikes and falls, and you recognize the familiar ache tightening behind your knees. Another dawn in the training yard. Another day your muscles will be reminded that ambition is not a thought, but a repetition carved through sweat. You step into the yard, and the world is already awake. A distant clatter of wooden swords meets the steady thud of hooves being exercised along the edge of the tilting lane. The yard hums with a rhythm that never fully rests. The scrape of shield edges dragging through dirt. The grunts of trainees attempting a maneuver they've practiced 100 times. The murmured corrections, drifting from knights, whose voices carry more patience than they admit. The air smells of splintered ashwood, damp earth, and the faint tang of iron warming in the early light. There is no announcement that the day has begun. The yard simply exists in a state of perpetual motion. You join it like someone stepping back into a long conversation, one where your place is understood without words. Your fingers tighten around the wooden practice sword, the weight lighter than real steel, but no less honest in its lessons. The grip is worn smooth from years of hands, uncertain at first, then practiced, and finally disciplined. You take your position, you breathe, you begin. The first swings are always stiff, more a reminder to your arms than an attempt at precision. The cold morning air keeps your joints slow, making every movement feel slightly out of tune. But the stiffness carries its own purpose, a reminder that mastery is not a moment of triumph, but 1,000 small corrections. Your body eases into the familiar pattern. The blade moving through arcs, it knows better than your mind does. The squire assigned to drill you circles with a shield in hand, his boots scuffing the packed soil. He raises the shield, tilting it just enough to show you the angle you should strike. You step forward, adjusting your footing, and the wooden blade cracks against the surface with a jolt that stings your wrists. The sound echoes through the yard before dissolving into the larger symphony of practice. Again, strike, adjust, strike, adjust. Discipline is not bravery, it is not inspiration. It is the quiet agreement between you and the world that you will keep showing up even when your body pleads for stillness. Your instructor watches from the side, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He speaks only when a correction is needed, and even then, his words are more like the tapping of a chisel on stone. Small, precise, shaping something slowly. He taps your elbow, nudges your stance, adjusts the angle of your wrist. You make the changes, you swing again. This is how a knight is made, through repetition that dulls the ego and sharpens the instinct. Nearby, another trainee loses his footing during a shield rush. He hits the ground with a heavy thud, dust erupting around him. For a moment he lies still, staring up at the sky, as though surprised to find it still above him. Then he rises, brushing dirt from his cheek, his breath ragged. No one mocks him. The yard has humbled everyone at least once, usually more. You remember your own falls, the way the ground seemed to tilt, the sudden absence of balance, the sting of impact that travelled through your spine. Each fall carved away whatever illusions you carried. Each rise built something steadier in their place. Your instructor calls you over to the makeshift barriers that line the tilting area. Today, it seems, balance is the lesson. You approach the narrow wooden beam, set low to the ground, a crude stand-in for the rhythmic sway of a moving horse. You mount it carefully, adjusting your stance, feeling for the point where your weight centers. The instructor tosses you a shield, its leather straps cool against your forearm. He gestures. You begin moving along the beam. The act is deceptively simple. Walk, keep your footing, hold your shield steady, but your body betrays you in small ways. Ankles shifting, knees tightening, shoulders tilting, just enough to disrupt your balance. You feel the wobble ripple upward, and you steady yourself with a deep breath. The shield grows heavier the longer you hold it. Your arm burns, your step slow. At the end of the beam, you turn around, then walk it again, and again, and again. The training yard asks one question over and over. How much discomfort are you willing to turn into habit? When the beam no longer feels like an enemy, you are sent to the practice posts. Wooden poles wrapped in straw. Here, the lesson is power without waste. The first strike jolts through your body, the second flows more cleanly. You aim for the same point again and again, watching the straw fray under the precise repetition. Sweat gathers at your temples, warm beneath the lingering coolness of the morning. A breeze drifts through the yard, carrying dust and the distant smell of horses. Somewhere, a metal helm rolls across the ground, with a hollow clang, followed by quiet laughter. You catch only fragments of conversation. Someone complaining about blisters, another swearing that their shield is cursed, a third insisting that yesterday's bruise has developed a personality of its own. The voices blend into a background hum, as familiar to you as the ringing of practice swords. The instructor returns, his gaze sharp. He taps your shoulder and motions you toward the sparring ring, a circle of packed dirt, battered shields marking its perimeter. Another knight in training waits inside, shield ready, wooden sword pointed downward in a gesture of respect. You enter. The spar begins quietly, almost gently. A test of footwork, rhythm, patience. The blades meet with restrained force, the sound more of a thud than a clash. You feel the vibration travel through your arms. You shift your stance, stepping lightly over the dirt, adjusting the shield angle. Your opponent presses forward, and you answer with a parry that sends a dull ache through your wrist. You breathe through it. The wooden swords strike again, then break apart. Dust rises around your feet, softening the edges of the world. The spar sharpens, not into violence, but into focus. You are no longer thinking of the instructor, or the yard, or the dirt clinging to your boots. Everything narrows to the swing of a blade, the angle of a shield, the subtle cues of the opponent's shoulders. When the spar ends, your breath comes heavy and warm in your throat. Sweat trickles along your spine. Your opponent nods, a small gesture of respect born not from victory or defeat, but from shared effort. You return the nod, feeling your pulse settle into something steadier. The instructor says nothing. Approval, in this yard, is shown through silence and the continuation of the lesson. Words are saved for errors. You drink water from a clay cup, the rim cool against your lips. The yard continues around you, endless motion, endless learning. The sun climbs higher, warming the backs of those still drilling, glinting off the metal pieces left on racks for later exercises. You take a moment to breathe, feeling your heartbeat slow. The exhaustion is familiar, but not unwelcome. It settles into your muscles like an old companion, reminding you that growth is not dramatic. It is quiet. It is gradual. It is earned one aching joint at a time. As the day stretches onward, you return to drills, to footwork, to shield holds, to endless adjustments that shape your body into something reliable. And though the training yard demands much, it gives something in return, a sense of direction, clearer than ambition, steadier than pride. By the time the sun begins to soften toward the horizon, your limbs feel heavy, your breathing deepened, yet beneath the fatigue lies a steadiness, a quiet recognition that discipline has carried you through another day. The yard empties slowly, voices fading into the cool air. You step away from the worn earth, muscles humming, sweat drying on your skin, the world around you gently dimming. And as you leave, you feel once more that persistent whisper beneath the fatigue, the understanding that tomorrow you will return because this is the path you chose, and the path that has chosen you. The afternoon settles over you slowly, like a heavy cloak warmed by hours of sun. Your body still carries the dull ache of the training yard, the kind that sinks deep into the muscles and reminds you that strength is never gained cleanly. You walk toward the stables, drawn not by command but by the quiet promise of stillness. The yard behind you fades into a distant hum of voices and practice blows ahead. The world narrows into the smell of hay, the hush of animals, and the soft rustling of straw underfoot. The stables are dim when you step inside, the daylight slipping through cracks in the wooden planks in thin golden sheets. Dust floats in the beams, like drifting pollen, each mote turning lazily, as though unhurried by anything humans concern themselves with. There is a calm here that the training yard never allows. The sharp edges of the discipline soften, replaced by the steady rhythm of breath and hooves shifting occasionally in deep straw beds. You let your eyes adjust to the muted gold glow, and your gaze settles on the destrier waiting in the nearest stall. He lifts his head when you approach, not with eagerness, but with a kind of tired recognition, as though he has seen countless knights walk toward him with the same mixture of proud hope and exhaustion. His dark eyes reflect a certain patience, the sort that comes from understanding burdens without needing to bear the stories behind them. You rest your hand on the stall door for a moment, feeling the faint warmth of the wood warmed by the sun. Then you step inside. The destrier exhales softly, his breath warm against your sleeve. You reach for the brush hanging on a worn leather loop and begin working it gently along his flank. The bristles glide through his coat with a soft rasp, gathering loose dirt and bits of straw. With each slow, deliberate stroke, your muscles unwind a little more, the tension melting into a quiet that the world rarely provides you. The horse shifts slightly to lean into your touch, not demanding, simply accepting. His hide radiates warmth, familiar and grounding. The scent of him is earthy and honest, sweat, hay, dust, and something faintly sweet, like dried apples stored for winter. You keep brushing, letting the rhythm of the motion carry your thoughts in unhurried circles. You've learned that horses listen better than most people. They read moods through the small tremors in your hands, the weight of your steps, even the way you breathe. A destrier is not merely ridden. He studies you, judges you, mirrors you. And yet, unlike the lords who place expectations on your shoulders, he asks nothing except consistency. The brush works along his neck, where the muscles run thick and powerful beneath the skin. You feel the strength gathered there, a strength you rely on far more than your pride ever allows you to admit. A knight may claim mastery over a horse, but in truth the horse decides whether he will be carried into danger or dropped unceremoniously into it. You move slowly around his body, pausing now and then to untangle bits of hay caught in his mane. The stall is warm, filled with the gentle sounds of animals chewing, hooves shifting, and the occasional snort from somewhere deeper in the stable. The world outside might be full of obligations and rituals, but here everything moves at a pace that feels older and wiser. Your destrier flicks an ear back toward you, as if checking your presence, or perhaps reminding you that your wandering thoughts cannot hide from the creatures who know the language of silence. You smile faintly, the expression small but genuine. It's difficult to lie to an animal that sees you more clearly than you see yourself. As you continue brushing, your hand pauses over a faint scar along his rib, a thin, pale line where the hair grows differently. You don't know the story behind it. Horses, like people, carry marks that never make it into official chronicles. You run your fingers gently along the scarred line, feeling the slight change in texture. He does not flinch. It is simply part of him, accepted, unremarkable. You envy that. Outside, distant voices drift through the open stable door, muffled and softened by walls of wood and straw. The sun slants lower, painting the stable aisle in warm amber tones. A pigeon coos softly from a rafter above, feathers rustling. The destrier lowers his head and nudges your shoulder, not hard, just enough to draw your attention back to him, as if reminding you that even your thoughts can drift too far. You brush along his legs, careful and slow. His muscles tighten briefly, then relax when he recognizes the familiar pattern of your touch. Horses remember hands. They remember the impatient grip of a nervous rider, the heavy pull of someone rushing, the calm, deliberate movement of someone who understands that strength doesn't need haste to prove itself. When you finish brushing, You set the tool aside and begin cleaning his hooves. He lifts each leg with a steady grace that speaks of trust built over time, not granted freely, but earned in increments, just like discipline. The underside of the hoof is packed with dirt, and you scrape it clean carefully, feeling the weight of his leg in your hand, firm but not resisting. The simple work is grounding. It reminds you that despite the armour you wear, despite the oaths you carry, and the expectations clinging to your name, you are still a creature made of breath and bone. Horses seem to know this instinctively. They see the truth behind the polished plates, the uncertainty behind rehearsed confidence. When you stand again, stretching your stiff back, the destrier turns his head toward you, his muzzle brushing your chest. The gesture carries more honesty than most congratulations you've received from men. You rest your hand gently against his thick neck, feeling the steady beat of his breath. He is an anchor in a world built on shifting loyalties. You fetch a small cloth and begin wiping his face, clearing the dust from the corners of his eyes. He closes them halfway, leaning into the touch. In that moment, he seems older than the stable itself, an ancient creature who has watched countless aspiring knights pass through, each thinking himself unique, each eventually learning the same slow lesson. The world does not bend to ambition. Not truly, not consistently. But horses understand how to move through it anyway. You run your hand down his mane one last time. The sun dips lower, the light fading to a tired orange that stretches long shadows across the stable aisle. You feel the residual warmth of the day on your skin, softer now, less intrusive. The aching in your limbs settles into something manageable, shaped by the quiet labour of grooming rather than the blunt force of training. The destrier huffs softly as you step back. You can almost sense him gauging your next move. You reach into the small pouch at your belt and offer him a piece of dried apple. He takes it gently, lips brushing your palm. The sound of his chewing is slow and unhurried, like someone savouring the rare sweetness in a world made mostly of grain and grass. You linger in the stall a while longer, watching him settle into a comfortable stance. His weight shifts rhythmically as he adjusts, the way horses do when preparing for a quiet moment. You feel your breathing match his without conscious thought. As the stable doorway darkens and the cool of evening begins to seep in, you step out of the stall. Your hand drifts across the wooden door as you leave it slightly ajar, knowing he will nudge it closed himself. It's a small habit he picked up long before you arrived. The aisle stretches before you, dim and warm, with other horses turning their heads as you pass. They watch you with the same unreadable patience. Some flick their ears in greeting, others simply continue chewing hay with slow, content rhythms. Their presence steadies something inside you, offering a quiet that feels earned rather than granted. When you reach the stable's open doorway, the air outside is cooler, carrying the first hints of approaching dusk. You step out, letting the last rays of sunlight touch your face. Behind you, the destrier shifts, the faint rustle of straw, a reminder that he waits, not for orders, not for glory, but simply for the next familiar rhythm in the long, slow dance between man and beast. And as you walk back toward the fading light, you understand, with a heaviness softened by time, that the horse you brushed today knows more about patience than you've ever managed, more about endurance than your armour ever taught you, and more about quiet wisdom than any oath you've sworn. You carry that understanding with you into the cooling evening. It follows you like a steady hoofbeat, unhurried, certain, and far older than knighthood itself. You wake before the light really reaches the sky, long before anything in the world seems interested in beginning the day. A grey heaviness hangs over the camp, the sort of reluctant dawn that looks as if the sun itself has doubts about rising. Your breath leaves in soft clouds, and somewhere far beyond your tent, a pot of thin morning pottage bubbles with a sound too similar to mud being stirred. You pull yourself to your feet anyway, because movement is not optional. Nights march, nights endure. Knights follow the will of commanders who, in turn, follow the will of lords who follow the will of politics. And politics rarely cares how cold your feet are. You step outside. Everything is damp. Everything. Your cloak clings to your shoulders. Your mail shirt feels like it has absorbed the entire night's moisture. And even the straps on your pack flex with that unpleasant spongy give that promises a long day of irritation. But you know the rhythm now. You know that the day will not wait for you to be comfortable. Men gather slowly, many blinking sleep from their eyes. The horses snort steaming breaths, shifting restlessly as tack creaks and hooves stamp impatiently at the soft ground. You move among them, checking your destrier's girth straps, smoothing a gloved hand down his neck. He tosses his head toward the south, as if he already knows the only truth that matters today. The road is long, and none of it will be interesting. The order to form up cuts through the morning, sharp as metal on stone, so you fall in line. There is no hurry at first. Armies do not move like arrowheads. They move like lumbering beasts, slow in the morning and slower in the evening, shoulders rising and falling in imperfect waves. The first steps are the worst, because your legs have not yet accepted that they belong to someone who voluntarily wears 40 pounds of iron and then decides to walk all day. The mud takes its first victim before you even reach the tree line. Someone's boot pulls free with an ugly slurp, but the person does not. He goes down with a curse muffled by the thick earth, already wet to the elbows. You step around him. Not out of cruelty, just necessity. One person trying to pull another from mud simply creates two stuck knights. Instead of one, he'll get up on his own, or someone behind you will give him a hand. The march doesn't pause for a single swallowed boot. The road snakes forward, an unremarkable trail, beaten flat by the years, and trodden down by so many feet they have lost count. You hear metal clinking all around you, mail brushing against mail, buckles tapping rhythmically like dull bells. It becomes its own sort of music after a while. The soundtrack of travel during a time when the world is mostly quiet between villages. You walk, and then you walk some more. The landscape refuses to offer you anything to remember it by. Fields fade into woods that fade back into fields. A farmhouse appears somewhere in the distance, then disappears behind a rise before you can get a proper look at it. If you were to return here next year, you doubt you'd recognize anything. The land is just shapes and shades, a long smear of earth-coloured monotony. Conversation rarely happens. The few who still have the energy for it let their words drift backward rather than forward, the wind carrying their voices to people too tired to care. The rest save their breath, each person locked inside the steady rhythm of labour. It becomes strangely meditative. You begin to count steps, not deliberately, but because your body seems to want something to latch onto. Every time you pass 500, the mail feels marginally heavier. The straps on your greaves dig just a little deeper, and the edges of your vision shimmer from the effort of focusing ahead. Somewhere in the distance someone coughs, someone else mutters a prayer. Another adjusts his pack with a grunt. None of it breaks the monotony. It simply folds into it, like background threads in a tapestry no one will ever display proudly. At midday you stop, not because the place is significant, but because the sun has reached its zenith, and that's reason enough. You peel the helmet from your head and feel the sudden shock of open air against your sweat-damp hair. Beneath the armour, your tunic clings uncomfortably, more water than cloth. A hard piece of bread becomes your meal. You chew it slowly, not out of savouring, but because your jaw is too tired to do it quickly. The horses graze without enthusiasm, tugging at tough grass and flicking their tails at flies. For a brief stretch of time, the world feels strangely peaceful. You lean on your pack, staring across the dull countryside, telling yourself the same lie every night learns to repeat. This isn't so bad, really. Then the horn blows, the moment ends, and the long march resumes. The sky begins shifting slowly toward a muddy gold as the afternoon drags on. Your shoulders ache from the unchanging weight. Your hips develop a slow-burning complaint from walking in armour. The soles of your feet feel hot in their boots, as if the leather itself has grown irritated with you. A puddle catches your attention when you step directly into it, cold water seeping through a gap in your boot stitching. You mutter under your breath and keep moving. Annoyances like this are not special, they're simply part of the uniform. Up ahead, two men argue softly, debating whether they're still travelling the same road they think they are. One insists the bend in the river should have appeared by now. The other swears the bend is farther west. Neither is right, and neither is wrong, because the commanding officers will lead everyone wherever the campaign needs them to go. Your opinion, like theirs, irrelevant. The march is not a journey with a grand purpose. It is motion for the sake of being in the right place later. Somehow that makes the miles feel heavier. A drizzle begins somewhere during the late afternoon, a fine mist at first, then a steady sheet of needle-like droplets that find their way into every seam of your cloak. Your mail darkens and glistens, your gloves go slick, and the world takes on the washed-out look of a painting left under running water. The road becomes a river of mud almost instantly. Step, sink, step, sink. Your pace slows. The clinking of armour sounds more like groaning chains. The wet earth drags at your boots until every footfall becomes a negotiation with the ground. You tell yourself that it cannot continue like this forever. You tell yourself the rain must stop eventually. You tell yourself the camp must be near. The rain ignores you, but the march continues because that is what armies do. You lift your chin now and then, squinting into the grey horizon, hoping to spot a campfire or banner or anything that marks the end of the day's labour. The sky darkens again, this time honestly, not reluctantly, and a faint hope rises with the shift in light. Evening, finally. When the call to halt finally echoes back along the column, you feel it like a physical release. Your knees nearly unlock with relief as you step off the path. Finding firmer ground beneath a cluster of low trees, the horses shake themselves vigorously, sending droplets flying in every direction. Men collapse onto packs, onto logs, onto whatever surface presents itself. Armour becomes an enemy, a heavy shell clinging stubbornly to aching muscles. You remove your helmet and let the night air hit your face. It smells of wet earth, damp wool, and the faint promise of a fire that hasn't been lit yet. There is no glory here, no cheering crowds, no noble feats. This is the part of a knight's life no minstrel bothers to mention. Endless miles, forgotten landscapes, soaked cloaks, boots filled with rainwater, meals eaten without sitting, and the dull certainty that tomorrow will demand the same from you again. But as you sit there, spine curved and shoulders loose with fatigue, you feel something like acceptance settle into your bones. The march is not designed to be heroic, it is the connective tissue between every tale of valour, the unseen hours that make the visible ones possible. You understand now more than ever that being a knight is not about battles. It is about endurance, about showing up again and again in places no one will ever remember. A slow wind brushes past, carrying the faint clatter of others removing armour, tending horses, arranging bedrolls. You close your eyes for a moment, letting your breath steady. The ground beneath you is cold, but it holds you up all the same. The long march ends for the day. It will begin again soon enough. But for now, you simply exist into the quiet, a tired figure in a tired world, learning the oldest truth of knighthood. Sometimes the greatest challenge is not the fight, but the distance between them. Night settles slowly over the makeshift camp, like a thick blanket pulled across the land by a reluctant hand. The drizzle has finally eased into a thin mist, and the last of the marching aches is still unwinding through your shoulders as you crouch near a shallow pit where flames lick at damp logs. The fire fights hard for its life, crackling, hissing, spitting sparks in stubborn defiance of the wet world around it. You lower yourself onto a rough log that serves as a seat. The warmth reaches your shins first, then your hands as you stretch your fingers toward the glow. The gloves you peeled off hours ago lie beside you, still soaked, still smelling faintly of horse leather and iron. But the fire makes the cold more tolerable. It takes the edge off your exhaustion, softens the stiffness in your knees, and draws you closer with the quiet promise of rest. Around the flames, men gather slowly, drawn not by command but by instinct. Even the most hardened soldiers have the same faraway look on nights like this, faces slackened by fatigue, eyelids heavy, expressions drifting somewhere between numbness and reluctant comfort. Someone chuckles, a faint tired sound that seems too light for a day of endless mud and rain. Another man joins him, then another, until the circle of firelight is filled with a thin ripple of laughter that rises and falls like a wave without strength. It's the kind of laughter that doesn't come from joy, but from the tired need to make noise, so the silence doesn't swallow everyone whole. You listen without adding to the sound. There is something soothing about these quiet conversations, the ones not meant to inspire or impress. No bravado, no polished speeches, just muttered stories, half-remembered jokes and confessions shaped by fatigue. Someone stirs the fire with a stick, sending a burst of embers spiraling upward, like tiny orange insects fleeing into the night. The glow paints the faces around you in warm, uneven strokes, lines deepened by shadow, eyes reflecting flickers of gold. The soldiers look older here, but somehow softer too, as if the fire has carved away everything harsh. You shift slightly, letting the heat wash across your chest. The scent of burning wood mixes with the wet smell of cloaks steaming near the flames. It's an aroma that sticks to armour, to hair, to memories, one that lingers long after the fighting is done. Your destrier stands tethered a few paces away, head lowered, dozing lightly. Even in sleep, he occasionally shifts his weight or snorts, reminding you that he also walked every mile you did today. The rain beaded in his mane has begun to dry, glistening like scattered beads in the firelight. You think briefly of brushing him down again, checking his hooves, making sure his tack is properly hung to dry, but your body refuses to move. For now, you trust that he can rest the way you do, imperfectly, but enough. A soldier across from you passes around a small wooden cup filled with weak ale. It tastes flat, but warm, and in this moment warmth matters more than quality. You take a slow drink, letting it settle in your stomach. The fire makes the ale feel richer than it is, as though it carries some forgotten sweetness brought back to life only within these glowing circles of flickering light. Voices drift. A man recalls a feast his village used to hold in late autumn. Bread ovens glowing, whole pigs roasting, children racing through falling leaves. He speaks of it not with longing, but with the calm acceptance of someone who knows the world he left behind will continue without him. Another describes the way his wife cuts vegetables, saying it as if the detail holds great importance. Maybe it does. The small domestic rhythms people cling to have more weight during long campaigns than any battle tactic. A third jokes that the mud has added inches to his height. His companion responds that it's added the same amount to his misery. Laughter follows, quiet, strained, but real enough for this hour. You say little. You've learned that most truths spoken around a campfire are carried on the smoke, rising up just long enough to be heard, then vanishing before dawn. What you keep in your own mind is quieter, simpler, the feel of heat on your face, the way the flames dance hypnotically, the way exhaustion makes even the smallest comfort feel significant. There's a strange honesty in these moments. Honesty that daylight rarely permits. Daylight expects discipline, composure, readiness. Firelight allows slumped shoulders, slow smiles, and unguarded thoughts. You lean forward and watch a log crumble into glowing red coals. You listen to the pop of trapped sap bursting inside the wood. You study the shifting patterns of flame as if they might offer answers to questions you haven't asked. Someone begins humming, a low, wavering melody carried from a distant childhood. It's not a marching tune, not a hymn, not a tavern song. Something simpler, softer, the kind of melody mothers use when they want their children to drift into sleep. The sound is fragile, like it could vanish if you breathed too deeply. Around you, heads droop. Some stare blankly at the fire. Others pick lazily at dried mud on their boots. One soldier sharpens a knife with slow, rhythmic strokes that blend with the crackling wood. The night deepens, folding in on itself like heavy velvet. The cold insists on returning, creeping into the spaces the fire hasn't claimed, but the circle holds. Men draw closer to the flames, shoulders brushing, legs stretched out, armor clinking softly when someone shifts. Your thoughts loosen in the warmth. Not sharp thoughts, not strategic, not tied to duty, just drifting impressions. You think of the long road behind you, of how many miles can disappear beneath a person's feet without leaving any trace in the mind. You think of the miles ahead, which may blur the same way. You think of home, but not in a painful or sentimental way. More like remembering a painting you once studied closely, but now only recall in soft edges and faint colours. The fire sways as a wind moves through the camp, carrying the faint smell of wet soil. Sparks rise, dance, then vanish. You follow their ascent for a moment, imagining the cold air swallowing them one by one. A companion offers you a strip of dried meat from his pack. You accept it. The flavour is bland but grounding. Every simple act feels amplified now. Shared food, shared warmth, shared silence. There is comfort in knowing that for this brief stretch of time, nothing more is required of you than to sit, breathe, and remain awake long enough for the fire to settle. No orders barked through the air, no frantic preparations, no urgency, just the quiet partnership of soldiers who have run out of energy for anything but honesty. One man admits softly that he is afraid of the next fight. No one mocks him, no one scolds him. They simply nod, as though acknowledging something as natural as rain. Fear is a companion here, uninvited but understood. Another confesses he no longer remembers why the campaign began in the first place. Eyes shift, glances exchange, but no answers come. You realise they don't need one. Men rarely march for reasons they hold in their own hands. A thin fog curls at the edge of the firelight. The flames cast long shadows behind the logs, making the world beyond the glow feel impossibly distant. The camp might as well be the only place on Earth right now. In some ways it is. The comforting lie begins to take shape among the quiet conversations. The shared, unspoken belief that tomorrow will be easier, that the road will dry, that the march will be shorter, that the weather will be kinder, that someone, somewhere, has a plan that leads toward rest instead of further strain. You know the truth is less generous, yet you let the lie settle around you like a warm cloak, because it helps you stay seated, helps you breathe a little deeper, helps you lean into the fire's glow without flinching at what waits beyond it. The flames shift again, shrinking lower, the bright edges beginning to fade into soft orange and dull red. The logs collapse inward with a sighing crack, sending a brief flare upward before settling again. Someone stirs the embers, coaxing a last few minutes of heat from the dying wood. You feel the weight of your eyelids deepen. The warmth on your face contrasts sharply with the chill creeping down your spine. The world outside the fire becomes increasingly formless, increasingly silent, increasingly irrelevant. For a moment you rest your palm against your knee and let your head drop slightly. Not enough to sleep, just enough to float in the limbo between weariness and dreams. The hum of quiet talk washes around you. Every sound blends into something soft, indistinguishable, comforting. The campfire glows honestly, offering the one truth tired warriors can trust, that tonight, for a few precious hours, the world will ask nothing of you. And for now, that is enough. The first hint of the memory comes, not as a sight or a sound, but as a pressure. An ache beneath the ribs that rises the way the morning mist lifts from trampled grass. You feel it before you see anything. That subtle tightening, as though your body remembers something your mind has only agreed to forget. It pulls you inward, gently but insistently, until you find yourself standing somewhere half-formed, half-lit, half-remembered. The air is heavy, not with smoke exactly, but with a thickness that reminds you of breath held too long. You sense motion before you understand it, a dull vibration through the ground, a rhythm without clarity, hoofbeats perhaps, or maybe just the lingering heartbeat of a moment that once demanded your full attention, but now recedes like a shoreline seen from far out at sea. Colours blur, shapes hesitate, nothing sharpens all at once. The world returns as if reluctant, piece by piece. You hear shouting, but not words, more like the muffled roar of distant waves breaking against cliffs. You hear metal striking metal, though the ringing is strangely muted, like sound passing through wool. Even your own breath seems quieter here, as if the memory is afraid that too much noise might wake something best left sleeping. You try to focus, but the scene resists definition. Helmets gleam, then vanish. A banner ripples somewhere overhead, its colours untrustworthy, fading every time your eyes attempt to grasp it. A figure rushes past on your right, mail jingling, boots sinking into soft earth. But the man's face refuses to stay. It flickers at the edges of recognition, then dissolves back into haze. You realise that you are not reliving the moment. You're drifting through what remains of it. Your hand tightens around reins that may or may not still exist. You feel the weight of a sword in your palm, heavy but familiar, its hilt warm from your grip. You sense the presence of your destrier beneath you, the rise and fall of the animal's breath, the shift of muscle and bone. Yet even the horse feels like a memory, borrowed from someone else. Only fragments cling to you with certainty, the jerk of motion as he surged forward, the thick smell of churned soil, the faint sting of sweat dripping into your eye. The field stretches out in front of you, though its borders are as vague as a half-drawn map. Shapes collide and separate, move and stall, advance and retreat. It is like watching a storm through fog. Everything in motion, nothing distinct. You remember our sound, one single clear sound that cuts through the haze, not the clash of steel, not the cry of men, but the sudden snap of wood, sharp and unmistakable, a lance breaking, perhaps yours, perhaps another's. The memory offers no explanation, only the echo. Your horse shifts again, responding to an instinct you no longer feel. You recall leaning forward, lowering your centre of gravity, bracing yourself. Not for glory, but for impact. Not for honour, but for survival. The songs always promise clean duels, elegant strikes, noble clashes bathed in sunlight. Yet all you ever found was confusion. Bodies pressing too close, ground uneven beneath hooves, a shield blocking your view, a sword flashing from nowhere, and the bewildering realization that no one truly knows what they're doing once the world begins to spin. You recall the smell of fear, your own though at the time you told yourself it belonged to someone else. You recall how heavy your breathing became, how your mouth felt dry and metallic, how your legs trembled, not from exhaustion, but from the sheer unfamiliar truth of danger made real. You search for the moment when courage was supposed to surge through you, that swelling of spirit the stories always describe, but nothing in this memory feels grand. Nothing heroic dances in the air. If courage was present, it was small and quiet, hiding beneath instinct, beating beneath the armour like a bird trapped beneath metal. Then comes the blur, the sudden burst of movement where everything happened faster than thought. A flash of steel crossing your vision, a jolt in your arm as your blade met something solid, a grunt from someone nearby, a sharp tug as your horse stumbled forward, splashing mud onto your greaves. The ground shook, Voices rose, something crashed, and then the memory breaks, not cleanly, not dramatically. It simply frays at the edges like old cloth, leaving you with a sense of motion, without meaning. You do not recall victory or defeat. You do not recall the final strike, or whether it was yours, or whether it mattered. You do not recall driving an enemy back, or being pushed yourself. All that survives is sensation, wet earth, shaking limbs, the jarring weight of your own armour. You drift a little farther into the recollection, and the world shifts again. You see a fallen figure at your feet, but the face is missing. Not out of mercy, but because the mind refuses to carve it back into shape. The memory offers no blood, only shadow. No suffering, only distance. You sense the weight of what happened, but not its details. The mind knows when to protect itself. Your breath thickens. The fog around you lifts just enough to show bodies scattered across uneven ground. Some move, some don't. Some raise an arm, others lie eerily still. The sounds return, laboured breathing, groans that vibrate low in the throat, the startled whinny of a horse trying to find its master. None of the sounds hold anger. None resemble the triumphant cries sung by minstrels. What you hear instead is exhaustion, the deep universal fatigue of men who expected meaning and found only chaos. You find yourself walking, or perhaps stumbling, across the field. Each step feels heavy, as if dragging echoes through time. Your sword hangs beside you, streaked with mud that may be something else. You do not raise it. There is no reason to. The fight has ended, though you can't recall how you learned that fact. Perhaps it ended because you could move no further. Perhaps it ended because someone blew a horn, though you hear no such sound now. Memory rarely keeps the signals, only the aftermath. The sky above the field is pale, washed out, lacking any dramatic storm or glorious beam of sunlight. Instead, it looks tired, as though even the heavens became worn from watching the struggle below. A thin breeze carries the smell of damp soil and crushed grass. It is almost gentle, as if the world wishes to soothe you for surviving an ordeal you never asked to witness. Your legs tremble again, though now the trembling feels distant, as though it belongs to the shadow version of you trapped in this weakened memory. Your mind floats just above the moment, observing it with weary detachment. You see your own shoulders droop. You watch your chest rise and fall in shallow breaths. You feel a heaviness settle inside you, not sorrow, not fear, but the strange numb understanding that battles do not shape nights. They erode them. You realize that the absence of detail is its own kind of truth. The mind dulls what never deserved clarity. The mind softens what was never worthy of song. Gradually, the memory releases you. The fog thickens once more, folding gently over the field like a protective shroud. The voices fade, the ground stills, the shapes dissolve into muted tones that drift outward like smoke caught in a slow breeze. Even the ghost of your destrier fades beneath you, leaving only the faint impression of warmth where the animal once stood. You breathe again, more fully now, as though rejoining a world that expects nothing of you. The echo of battle lingers only as a pressure behind your ribs, the same place where the memory first stirred. You understand with a quiet clarity that it will always remain this way, a muted recollection, softened by time, stripped of glory, leaving only the dull truth of survival. And as the last fragments fade, you feel yourself moving forward again, carried by a world that flows on with or without heroic stories to guide it. You step into the chapel with the same slow deliberation you have learned to carry across stables, training yards, and marching fields. The air is cool, slightly damp, and fragrant with the faintly sweet tang of wax and centuries of incense. Candles flicker in uneven rows along stone ledges, their flames trembling with small breaths of wind that sneak through cracks in the walls. The light dances across the rough surfaces, pooling in shadows that stretch long and improbable across the floor. Here, You feel time move differently. It folds, halts, and returns in quiet eddies, a rhythm the world outside seldom allows. Your boots echo softly on flagstones worn smooth by countless kneeling feet. The sound reminds you of earlier mornings when you knelt beside your bedroll in the camp, or bent over the damp soil in the training yard. Kneeling has always felt like an act of surrender, a concession to something larger than yourself. And yet here it is different, calmer, more deliberate. There is no shouting officer, no clatter of practice weapons. The only accompaniment is the occasional hiss of a candle guttering, the faint creak of the wooden benches settling under their own weight, and your own measured breathing. You move toward a small altar, its surface crowded with the tiny remnants of devotion. A worn crucifix, a thin relic of bone wrapped in velvet, and a candle stub, blackened from many previous flames. You extend a hand, not to touch but to acknowledge, feeling the strange gravity these objects carry. They are fragments of centuries, bits of lives and stories, condensed into objects that survive while the people who venerated them do not. You sense the quiet expectation in their presence, that those who come here will find a fragment of meaning, even if only for a moment. A hush settles over the chapel, not imposed, but earned. You notice the slight draught that carries faint echoes of footsteps from outside, the smell of wet earth drifting through the open doorway. You let it mix with the incense, the candle wax, the faint iron tang lingering from your gloves, and breathe it in. Each inhalation seems to weigh the air with an unseen gravity, reminding you of the slow and deliberate life you have chosen, or that has chosen you. You wander along the nave, noticing the worn stone carvings along the walls, saints whose faces have been rubbed smooth by time, angels whose wings seem impossibly delicate, given the solidity of the stone. They watch silently, as if aware of everything, yet willing to say nothing. You pause before one figure, a knight in relief, holding a shield that mirrors your own, bearing the same unyielding posture. You imagine the sculptor chiseling with painstaking care, the hammer striking stone in quiet succession, each tap an echo of devotion or ambition, a record of someone else's understanding of courage. You feel a kinship with this silent guardian. Its armor, too, is heavy, too, its duty unending, its watchfulness eternal. You kneel before the altar, letting your hands rest lightly on the stone edge. Prayer, when it comes, is not loud or urgent. It is a quiet dialogue with doubt and hope alike, each mingling in the small space between your heartbeat and your thoughts. You think of the oaths you took, the vows repeated under the unyielding pressure of expectation. You feel their weight now in a different form, a gentle insistence, a quiet reminder of the distance between intention and reality. Faith here is not a thing of certainty. It is an acknowledgement of the unknown, a subtle arrangement of hope and discipline. The candle flames respond to the slightest movement of air, bending toward one another or away as if they are in conversation. You watch the shadows ripple over the stone floor and imagine them as the remnants of countless prayers, whispered, muttered, or simply held in silence. There is a tactile quality to this stillness. You can feel it pressing lightly against your skin, resting on your shoulders like a soft mantle, urging reflection without judgment. You approach a small reliquary, its wood polished to a soft gleam, its locks delicate, almost ornamental. You consider what might lie inside, a fragment of a saint, a bone, a thread of cloth. It is impossible to tell without opening it, yet the uncertainty is part of its power. The object itself becomes a bridge between what is tangible and what is imagined, between belief and observation, between the weight of history and the weight of your own experience. You place a hand near the case, sensing the faint hum of devotion lingering in the air. It is not miraculous, not overtly so. It is simply persistent, like memory that refuses to vanish. You sit on a hard bench and close your eyes for a moment. The world shrinks to the warm flicker of candlelight, the faint odour of wax, the distant echo of footsteps that belong to neither friend nor foe. You can almost feel the presence of the knights who have knelt here before you, men who bore heavy mail, heavier expectations, and left their names only in whisper or stone. They watch silently, as if willing you to notice the lineage of careful endurance, the quiet constancy of life observed under a shadow of devotion. A draught brushes across the chapel, carrying the faint sound of water dripping from a roof edge outside. The rhythm is unremarkable, yet it feels significant, a reminder that time moves on, that life exists beyond these walls, that faith and doubt continue their quiet duel outside human comprehension. You breathe in the mingled scents and feel the muscles in your back and shoulders relax, realizing that the chapel, for all its gravity, is not a place to triumph, but to pause. You notice a faint glow behind the altar, where the stone has been polished by countless hands reaching for blessing, for comfort, for hope. You reach out your fingertips, brushing lightly against the cool surface. The stone is heavier than you expect, holding the weight of centuries in a way that is almost perceptible. It anchors you in the present, even as your mind drifts along the currents of history. You think of the oaths, the armour, the marches, and the battles, and sense that all of these have led inexorably to this soft, deliberate space. A bell chimes somewhere, perhaps from a nearby tower, perhaps carried to you only in memory. Its resonance rolls through the chapel like a tide, gentle and inevitable. You feel a subtle connection to it, the way a man feels the pull of tide on land he cannot see. It is a reminder that even within uncertainty, some forces persist, quiet, patient, and unyielding. You rise slowly, stretching your stiff limbs. The air feels cooler now as the candles flicker lower, casting shadows that stretch and lean like curious spectators. You make your way toward the doorway, pausing only to glance back at the relics, the carvings, the faint traces of prayer that linger in the stones. A sense of quiet understanding settles over you. Faith and doubt are not opposites here, but companions. Both shape the life of a knight who carries expectations heavier than mail, yet who must also bear the softest, most intangible weight, the weight of his own reflection in the stillness. Outside, the evening has deepened, the sky fading into bruised shades of indigo and violet. You breathe in the cool air, scented faintly with earth and smoke, and feel the subtle echo of the chapel's stillness accompany you as you walk back toward the camp. You are aware of your steps, slower than they might be elsewhere, carrying a sense of gravity that belongs as much to thought as to muscle. The memory of saints, of candles, of quiet devotion follows you softly, settling into your mind like ash from a long extinguished flame. You glance at your companions across the camp, scattered about in the remnants of last night's firelight. They do not notice the subtle shift in your bearing. No one ever does, but the experience has left its mark in ways beyond notice. Faith and doubt, relics and prayers, the soft light of understanding. They have added another layer to your long, slow path as a knight, a layer that is not visible in armour, or measured in victories, or recorded in any official account. Yet it is as real and as essential as the weight of mail on your shoulders. You take one last slow breath, carrying the scent of candles, stone, and lingering incense with you as the night grows colder and the distant campfire flickers faintly. You know that tomorrow will demand its own endurance, its own walking, its own armour and oaths, its own long miles and quiet trials. But tonight, you have moved through a world where mystery is not a riddle to solve, but a companion to observe. And that, you sense, is a form of understanding as valuable as any victory or triumph you might ever earn. The morning rises slowly, not with a burst of light, but with a gentle, grey expansion that seeps into the edges of the camp. You wake with muscles still stiff from yesterday's march, and the faint ache of yesterday's armour lingering in your shoulders. You do not hurry. The day will unfold regardless of your pace, and you have learned that small deliberate steps often carry you farther than haste. You find yourself seated beneath the shadow of a tree at the edge of the road, pulling from memory an invisible ledger that no one else can see but you. Its pages are thick and worn, stained with the faint echoes of ink that have long since faded. You turn the leaves slowly, deliberately, as though each turn might reveal some secret. Each page contains not names or victories, but accounts, numbers that speak more loudly than trumpets ever could. Coins spent on iron plates, leather straps, and the soft padding beneath your mail. Payments made to smiths and farriers, some honest, some cleverly deferred. Favours traded, debts assumed quietly in the name of loyalty, and the occasional bribe to ensure that obligations were remembered favourably. The ledger is infinite. The entries do not end, and yet despite its weight you read with a calm detachment. It is as much a companion as it is a reminder. Its numbers and notes are not judgmental, they simply exist. They mark the reality that being a knight requires constant accounting, not only of coin, but of effort, endurance, and goodwill. Every feast you attended, every horse you purchased, every blade polished and repaired has a cost, tangible or otherwise. Honour itself carries a subtle, persistent expense that no armour or oath can offset. You close your eyes briefly and feel the weight of all of it. The packs carried, the horses tended, the miles walked, the nights of hunger softened by thin bread. Each entry in your ledger represents a choice made and a consequence felt. Some debts are immediate, a farrier's bill that must be paid before a horse can be ridden again, a smith who expects gratitude and gold in equal measure. Others are slower, more insidious, favours owed to lords, obligations to comrades, promises whispered in hallways, lit by torchlight that cannot be taken back. You touch your fingers to the ledger as if it were real, tracing lines of invisible ink. The sensation is comforting in its own way. You are reminded that each obligation, no matter how tedious or hidden, contributes to the life you inhabit. You do not resent these debts, not entirely. They are a constant rhythm beneath the more visible demands of knighthood, the quiet measure of the work you have performed, and the labour still required. A hawk glides above the trees, its wings steady and unhurried, and you imagine that it too carries some hidden account of the land beneath it. Its sharp eyes would notice the faint tracks of men and horses, the mud scuffed from yesterday's march, the trails of smoke from distant hearths. You envy its perspective, its ability to trace patterns without bearing weight or obligation. Still, the hawk knows nothing of loyalty, nothing of the subtle, invisible debts that a knight carries you, for all your burdens, inhabit a world richer and stranger than its eyes will ever perceive. You rise slowly, the ledger folding itself carefully into your memory, and step toward the camp. The air smells of wet earth, of horses warming themselves against the cold, of the lingering ash from last night's fire. The men stir, rubbing sleep from their eyes and stretching stiff limbs. Some glance at you, though none notice the silent accounting you carry in your mind. The world measures what it can see, yet you navigate the spaces in between, the unseen ledger of effort and fidelity. By midday, you're adjusting your own armour, noticing once more the way it pinches and binds, the way straps have loosened in some places and pressed too tightly in others. Each adjustment carries both cost and consequence. A tightened strap prevents injury in a minor tumble, but aches tomorrow. A looser strap spares the skin now, but allows imbalance in movement. The choices seem trivial until summed across the days, weeks and months, until the ledger in your mind grows heavier with awareness. Every minor discomfort is accounted for, added to the tally of endurance. Every careful movement becomes an entry. Prudence, care, foresight. You walk through the camp, observing men engaged in quiet labours. One sharpens a blade with meticulous patience. Another tends to a horse whose legs still carry the residual stiffness of yesterday's march. The bread is broken into small portions, passed with careful calculation. The spoons and cups weighed against supply and need. You sense the subtle interplay of debt and favour, how one man's labour offsets another's. Each act is measured, though no one speaks the sums aloud. Honour and obligation intertwine in a slow, deliberate dance that will continue whether you acknowledge it or not. Your gaze drifts to the far edge of the camp, where a merchant has pitched a small stall. Coins clink faintly in exchange for supplies. A few precious items of comfort, dried meat, coarse wine, soft cloth to line the inside of helmets. You approach and consider the subtle exchange. Even here, honour and debt are inseparable. Payment in coin, promise, or acknowledgement of future service. The merchant smiles politely, aware that debts sometimes linger as long as the memory of kindness. You hand over the coin with care, the transaction quiet, almost ceremonial. Another entry added, another line in the invisible ledger. By afternoon, you find a quiet spot beside a narrow stream. The water is shallow, clear, and moving fast enough to mask the faint creaking of armour as you settle onto a stone. You lean back, letting the warmth of the sun, weak but persistent, soften the stiffness of your limbs. Your thoughts return to the ledger. Not the transactions alone, but the moral weight of what it represents. Each coin, each promise, each favour is a thread in the fabric of your life. Honour cannot be bought outright. It is measured in attention, in constancy, in the acknowledgement of responsibility. Yet no ledger can account for every nuance, and that is why your mind tends to these invisible pages like a careful archivist. You record what matters and let the rest drift into the margins of memory. The stream carries the faint sound of rippling water to your ears, almost musical, almost meditative. You trace its course with your gaze, imagining that it too keeps its own ledger. The movement of leaves, the fall of sediment, the passage of time across smooth stones. You feel a kinship with it. Like you, it moves continuously, shaped by gravity, resistance, and the obstacles it encounters. Like you, it bears its own quiet obligations. When you return to the camp at dusk, you sense the firelight beginning to emerge across the clearing. You notice how the men prepare their evening meal, trading stories as the light fades. Coins, favours, and promises may have been recorded in your mental ledger, but here they manifest in gestures. A shared morsel of bread, a horse led gently to water, a helmet adjusted by a neighbour with no expectation of repayment. These are the living entries, the subtle confirmations that honour is less a trophy than a practice sustained by daily observation, attention, and care. Night falls fully, and the fire's glow stretches long shadows across the clearing. You settle on a log, letting your body rest, and your mind trace one final set of invisible lines. The ledger closes softly, not erased but stored carefully, ready to be revisited. Each day adds its own entries. Each action, thought, or decision leaves a mark. You understand now that knighthood is not only about the battles fought or the glory earned, but about these quiet reckonings, the careful balance of service, fidelity, and personal cost. The night is calm, the stars reflected faintly in pools of water across the camp. You inhale the cool air and feel the satisfaction of a day spent accounting, not for triumph, but for constancy. Honour and debt are inseparable companions, and in the ledger of your mind, each has its rightful place. Here, in the quiet of the camp, beside the firelight and the whispering wind, you understand one of the oldest truths of knighthood. Every choice, every sacrifice, every act of care is recorded, if only in memory, if only in the careful, deliberate balance between what is owed and what is given. And in that balance, you feel a rare and almost gentle satisfaction, the kind that no triumph or song can ever fully convey. You rise with the sun, not abruptly, but with the slow certainty of someone accustomed to moving under expectation, yet yielding to the natural rhythm of light. The campfire from last night has burned to embers, and the men have already begun stirring, stretching, tending horses, and whispering softly to one another as if the world itself were asleep. You do not rush. You step lightly across the damp earth, letting the quiet of early morning settle into your shoulders. There is a day ahead, but it is not yet demanding, and the calm is enough. Ahead lies the manor, or at least what is called yours. It is smaller than you imagined when oaths were made, and expectations whispered into eager ears. The path leading to it twists over uneven ground, lined with fields that are stubborn, overgrown, and reluctant to yield their fruit. The cottages are humble, some leaning, some with thatched roofs, patched roughly with straw, each telling the same quiet story. Survival is messy, life is unglamorous, and the promise of ownership is often more abstract than real. As you walk, the weight of your armour seems incongruous with the modest landscape, as if you were meant for great halls and wide battlefields, rather than mud-slicked paths and tiny gardens. The sun rises slowly, brushing the tips of the cottages with soft light. Smoke curls from chimneys in thin, lazy spirals, and the faint smell of cooking bread drifts toward you. You inhale it deeply, savouring the small comfort it provides. Here, in these fields, life does not move with banners, heralds, or the clamour of tournaments. It moves with the rhythm of soil and stone, of seasons and animal need, and you are an observer as much as a participant. The manor itself is modest, a low stone house with narrow windows, its walls marked with age and weather. The roof sags slightly in one corner, the door creaks when you push it open, and the floors carry the faint chill of night. You step inside and hear the echoes of your boots against stone. The silence is substantial, almost tactile, filled with the memory of people who once walked these rooms, tending hearths, mending clothing, and keeping accounts. You feel the weight of expectation that this is yours, even as the reality of its needs. Repairs, provisions, and the attention of those who live and work here outstrips any illusion of ownership you may have carried. You wander through the rooms, touching the rough walls, letting your fingers trace the faint scars of past labour. You see the empty hearth and imagine the labour required to light it properly, to stoke it throughout long evenings. You sense the effort it will take to maintain warmth in winter, to ensure food is available for all who rely on it, and to keep the structures from collapsing under their own history. This manor is a living testament to the constant, unglamorous demands of stewardship. Its beauty lies not in perfection, but in persistence. Outside, you walk the fields, boots sinking into damp soil. You notice the uneven rows of crops, some thriving, some struggling. The earth is generous in theory, but exacting in practice, never giving without asking in return. You see a worker bending over the soil, hands deep in the dark brown loam, sweat glinting in the morning light. You realise that every effort you make, every inspection, every command carries weight, but it is the quiet labour of others that makes the life of the manor possible. The land itself seems to whisper its requirements, reminding you that it does not recognise titles or oaths, only attention, effort and patience. You pause at the edge of a small orchard, observing the twisted trunks of apple trees. Their branches strain under the weight of fruit, some heavy, some sparse. A gentle breeze lifts a few leaves, sending them dancing across the grass like small, deliberate messengers. You imagine the work required to prune these trees, to harvest the fruit, to ensure that nothing is lost to rot or neglect. the thought is humbling. A knight who can command armies in theory, who can wear armour and bear arms, is not automatically prepared for this constant measured struggle against entropy. You wander further, passing the cottages of those who serve and live here. Children peek from behind doors, cautious, curious. You nod quietly, acknowledging them without words. Their lives intertwine with the manor's health in ways that are invisible to the heralds and genealogists who once wrote flowery accounts of lands entrusted and titles held. You are beginning to understand that a manor is not owned, it is tended, maintained, and negotiated with daily, quietly, persistently. Each repair, each meal, each expectation you fulfill is a line in the unspoken ledger of responsibility. The animals are equally demanding. Horses paw at the ground near stables, hooves sinking into mud, softened by recent rain. Chickens scratch and cluck. Chickens whose eggs are needed to feed the household. Goats nibble at overgrown weeds, demanding constant attention. You walk among them, feeling the soft heat of their bodies, the small weight of their dependence, and the inevitability of their needs. Even the most loyal destrier from your days on the road cannot shield you from these responsibilities. Here, the weight is invisible but persistent, the quiet accounting of daily survival. You pause by a small stream that runs along the property. Water flows steadily, carrying with it the reflection of sky and trees. You think about the work required to channel it, to use it for the household, to prevent it from overflowing into destruction. Everything here is intertwined. Soil, water, labour, oversight. Each element insists upon attention, and no title can replace the hours demanded by observation, effort, and quiet negotiation with the world. By afternoon, the sun has climbed higher, casting shadows across the manor and its fields. You sit on a low stone wall, letting your back lean against its cool surface. The weight of expectation has not lessened, but it has shifted into a different kind of awareness, one less about glory and more about presence. You are aware that your care, your attention, your daily movement through this small holding is what keeps it alive. No banner, no oaths, no heralds, only the quiet labour of the day and the steady persistence of your own presence. You think about the descriptions you read in genealogies long ago, tidy lines of succession, noble holdings carefully recorded, lands imagined as perfect, bountiful, and obedient. Reality is different. The land is tired, the animals are insistent, the cottages lean unpredictably, crops fail or flourish on their own schedule, and yet in this discrepancy there is a kind of beauty, a testament to endurance, to attention, and to the slow, quiet power of stewardship. As evening approaches, you light a small fire in the hearth, watching as smoke rises and mingles with the fading light of day. You hear the distant chatter of villagers returning from labour, the low bleat of goats, the gentle clop of horses settling into their stables. The manor hums with life, not celebrated, not sung about, but undeniably real. You feel your own presence weaving into this fabric, your footsteps and care becoming a subtle part of the ongoing story. Night falls fully, and you move through the dimly lit rooms, checking doors, adjusting supplies, noting small repairs for tomorrow. Each action, though minor, feels significant. The manor is alive in its quiet demands, and you are alive within it. The glow of the hearth reaches your shoulders, warming armour long since set aside, and you pause for a moment to inhale the mingled scent of wood smoke, damp stone, and earth beyond the walls. The weight of reality, though never soft, is tempered by the satisfaction of attention given and work acknowledged, even if only by yourself. And as you settle for the night, hearing the soft rhythms of the manor breathing around you, you understand another truth of knighthood. Titles, lands, and expectations are only as meaningful as the quiet work that sustains them. Honour is stitched not in banners or battles alone, but in tending the tired, asking land to give more than it seems willing, and acknowledging the subtle debts owed to the people, the earth, and the rhythm of daily life itself. The chill of dawn brushes across your shoulders as you rise from the edge of the manor hearth. The fire has long since died to embers, leaving a soft glow that clings faintly to the stone. You stretch and feel first the subtle protest of your knees, then the ache in your hips, small reminders that the body you command is no longer as pliant or eager as it once was. Time moves invisibly, quietly, like a shadow slipping across the floor, and its presence is most apparent in the small betrayals of your own frame. You step into the cool morning air, noticing the way the earth presses into your boots, differently than it did decades ago. Muscles that once carried you tirelessly now hum faintly with the memory of labour, each step a conversation with fatigue. The sun is low, brushing the fields with muted gold, and you walk along the worn paths with the same measured care you have always cultivated, yet now tinged with a new patience. You do not rush. The rhythm of movement has shifted from ambition to endurance. The manor lies quiet, its cottages softened by the haze of morning mist. The fields stretch out, patient and unyielding, demanding attention and care in equal measure. You notice the slight sag in the beams above the stable doors, the cracks in the plaster that have widened imperceptibly over time, and the slow bending of the orchard trees that seem to mirror your own stoop. Everything carries weight, and everything has settled into a cadence of inevitability. You sense your own reflection in it, the slow accumulation of years, the quiet insistence of experience that cannot be hurried or denied. You pause by a horse, its coat gleaming faintly in the muted light. The animal looks at you with patient eyes, unperturbed by the years that have passed or the weight that now sits more heavily upon your shoulders. You brush the mane with careful fingers, noting how your grip is less certain than it once was, how the subtle flex of joints now requires mindfulness. The horse, unbothered by time, carries you as it always has, and you marvel at the persistence of loyalty, the kind that neither age nor ambition can tarnish. Walking across the fields, you notice the way your own breath has changed. It comes slower, measured, with pauses that were absent in youth, when energy seemed inexhaustible. You listen to the wind stirring the grass and trees, feeling it as a gentle counterpoint to the subtle groan of your own frame. There is no bitterness in this realization, only observation. A quiet acknowledgement that the ambitions of youth fade not with a bang, but like the last trace of candlelight, soft and insistent. You think back to days of rigorous training, to miles of tramping across the countryside, to hours spent polishing armour until every dent and scratch spoke of vigilance. Those were days marked by a restless eagerness, a hunger to prove worth through action. Now, the same routines persist, but the urgency has shifted. Each movement is tempered with mindfulness, each decision measured not by glory, but by sustainability. You understand that the world does not demand less, only that the demands are met differently, with patience and care rather than ambition and haste. The fields show the subtle traces of seasons past. Patches of earth still bear the marks of floods and frost. Crops bend or break under the caprices of weather. You walk slowly among them, feeling the weight of memory settle into your bones. The labour of youth is remembered in faint aches and stiffness. The victories of years gone by are softened in recollection, like sunlight through fog. Yet the work continues, unchanged in its quiet insistence, a subtle teacher that has outlasted armies and banners. You pause at the edge of a small orchard. The trees here are no longer vigorous. Their trunks twist, bark furrowed and roughened with age. You touch one gently, feeling the rough texture beneath your fingers, and imagine your own joints as bark, stiffened, bearing the weight of countless winters. The apples are fewer than in years past, yet they carry the same potential, the same insistence on care. You understand that time has crept into every corner of your life, altering expectations, adjusting capacities, and reminding you that endurance is as much a measure of a knight's life as triumph in battle. Moving back toward the manor, you hear the faint sounds of daily life stirring within the cottages. Children laugh quietly, tending small chores under the watchful eyes of adults. Their energy is vibrant, untempered, and it strikes you that youth is both visible and fleeting, a contrast to your own slow rhythm, which is deliberate, patient, and observant. You feel a gentle envy for the ease of their bodies and the lack of memory pressed into their joints, yet there is no resentment, only recognition. Time has its own pattern, and you inhabit yours fully with awareness and quiet acceptance. By midday, you find yourself beside a small pond at the edge of the property. The water is still, reflecting the sky like a muted mirror. You sit on a low stone, allowing your back to press against the cool surface. You watch your reflection, noting how the years have softened lines and furrows, how hair, once dark and lively, now carries the quiet grey of endurance. You imagine the countless miles walked, the battles fought, the hours of care and attention given to horses, land and companions. Each has settled into memory, a ledger written not in ink, but in the very structure of your body. You let your hands rest lightly on your knees, feeling the subtle tremor of muscles and joints that have carried both expectation and burden. You think of the armour once worn heavy and inflexible, and how it compares now to the softer but no less demanding weight of experience. Time has a different density than iron, yet both press insistently upon the body. You acknowledge the inevitability of this, the slow creeping knowledge that the ambitions of youth become memories carried like old scars, visible only in certain light, noticeable only when stillness allows reflection. Walking back toward the manor, you pass the fields where labourers are still at work. You notice the careful attention given to the smallest of tasks, mending fences, tending the animals, ensuring water channels do not overflow. You understand that the slow march of age is mirrored in all these things. The world itself grows heavier with time, yet continues, unhurried and persistent. Each careful action is a quiet testament to endurance, a reminder that life, though altered by years, remains insistently present. Evening approaches. The sun lowers to the horizon, casting long shadows across the manor and its fields. You pause, allowing the fading light to play over your shoulders, across the gentle slope of your back and along the lines of your hands. You feel the subtle shifts in your body with each movement, acknowledging their presence without complaint. There is no drama, no lamentation, only the calm acceptance of reality. Time has crept into your bones, but it has also granted insight, a quiet understanding of limits, endurance, and the persistent, patient rhythm of life. As darkness settles, you return to the hearth inside the manor. The fire is lit with deliberate care, its warmth spreading slowly, touching the joints and muscles stiffened by the day's reflection and labour. You sit near it, letting the soft glow bathe your face. Outside, the night is quiet, the faint rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl the only witnesses to your contemplation. You realise that, like the land and animals around you, your body has its own rhythm, its own quiet demands. To move with awareness, to act with patience, to observe without impatience. These are the measures of a knight whose youth has receded into memory. You lean back, listening to the soft crackle of the fire, feeling the slow beat of your heart and the subtle pull of tired muscles. You understand that life continues in its measured pace, that ambition and desire have been replaced by endurance and care, and that the slow creep of age is neither enemy nor burden, but companion. It reminds you of the fleeting beauty in every step, the quiet persistence of work, and the patience required to observe the world without haste. Here, in the soft glow of hearth and memory, you feel the weight of time settle, gentle yet insistent, and you breathe in, fully aware, fully present, fully yourself. The air is quiet now, heavier with the scent of earth cooling under the fading light. You step onto the familiar path that winds along the hill behind the manor. Each stone, each patch of grass seems to hold the memory of years spent walking, standing, and observing. You feel the slow press of time along your spine, the gentle ache in shoulders and hips, and you realize that these aches are less punishment than punctuation, the quiet marks of a life fully carried, like worn ink on the page of a ledger no one else will read. The sun leans low, softening the world into gold and shadow. You pause for a long moment, letting the warmth touch your face and hands. There is no urgency here, no call to action, only the slow, inevitable descent of light and the persistent rhythm of your own breathing. You notice the distant fields, the bending trees, the cottages that have stood through seasons and storms, and a strange understanding settles over you. All of this, the land, the labourers, the animals, even your own restless body, has been patient with you as you have been patient with it. You walk slowly, allowing the uneven ground to press into your boots with quiet insistence. Each step carries memory, the long marches, the campfires, the weight of armour, the fatigue of distant roads, the strange muted satisfaction of obligations met. You feel the pull of those past experiences, not as burdens, but as faint vibrations beneath your skin, like echoes that persist long after the sound has faded. In the twilight, they settle into a soft rhythm, and you realize that this life, measured in repetition and care, in quiet endurance and small attentions, has left a trace more lasting than any banner or medal ever could. The manor comes into view, softened by the haze of evening. Smoke rises faintly from chimneys, curling toward the dimming sky. You notice how the shadows stretch across the walls, how the last rays touch the roofs and the rough stones of the foundation. You remember the days when you imagined ownership as something noble and unassailable, when titles and oaths seemed to promise power beyond measure. Now at Ushishao, you understand that the true claim is quieter, subtler, the act of showing up, of tending, of noticing, of enduring. Ownership is less a right than a persistent practice, and in the twilight, the truth of it is clear. You make your way through the yard, brushing your hand across the rough fence, the warm hide of a horse, the worn handles of tools that have laboured alongside you for years. Everything bears the imprint of human attention, the careful shaping of daily life. You think of the campfires where men laughed softly through fatigue, the stables that smelled of hay and sweat, the orchards where fruit bent the branches low, and you feel a gentle pride. Not a pride shouted in songs or heralded in halls, but the deep, quiet satisfaction of work endured, of a life observed and maintained with care. The air grows cooler, and a faint wind carries the scent of damp earth and drying grass. You breathe it in slowly, aware of the subtle movements of your own body. The creak of joints, the slow beat of the heart, the pulse of blood in hands and feet. Time has settled into you, heavier than chainmail ever was, and yet the weight is neither cruel nor sharp. It is simply a measure, a marker of the years lived, the choices made, and the effort carried forward. Each ache, each stiffened muscle, each careful step is a line in the ledger of a life fully inhabited. You walk past the cottages where the villagers tend to evening chores. Children chase one another, laughter faint and fleeting, while adults move with deliberate care, preparing food, feeding animals, and gathering what is necessary for the night. You pause to observe, noting how seamlessly their lives intertwine with the land and the manor, how effort and attention are woven into every motion. You feel an odd kinship with them, recognizing that the rhythms of survival, labor, and quiet responsibility have always been part of knighthood, just as much as sword and banner. The sun dips lower, casting a long, soft shadow across the manor's walls. You pause on the porch, resting a hand against the cool stone, feeling the gentle give of the earth beneath your boots. The landscape is transformed in the evening light, the hills softened, the trees muted in tone, the sky a gradient of gold fading into rose, and finally the deepening blue of night. You sense the passing of decades, not as regret, but as gentle accumulation. The slow sediment of experience settling into the consciousness, like leaves drifting to a pond. You notice the animals in their pens, quiet now, settled into evening routines. The horses shift slowly, their breathing calm. Chickens settle into their coops, hens huddled against one another. For warmth, even the wind seems to slow its pace, moving through the trees and across the fields with deliberate care, as if acknowledging the day's end and the long arc of life it represents. You feel the same stillness beginning to settle over your own shoulders, the muscles loosening, the mind slowing into reflection. Inside, the hearth glows with firelight, low and patient. You move through the rooms, checking doors and windows, adjusting blankets for warmth, and noticing the quiet details that speak of continuity. A table set with care, a broom resting against a wall, a pitcher of water waiting for use. Every small act is imbued with purpose, each gesture a continuation of the life you have lived, the grandeur imagined in youth. Tournaments, heraldry, the thrill of battle is softened into routine, into practice, into the steady attention to what is real, tangible, and necessary. You sit finally by the hearth, the fire warming your shoulders and the back of your neck. Shadows play along the walls, twisting in patterns that seem to echo distant memories. The clang of armor, the neigh of a horse, the soft murmur of voices in the night. You allow these echoes to settle around you, acknowledging them without disturbance, feeling how the small, persistent realities of life have become more significant than any fleeting moment of triumph. Outside, the sky darkens fully, stars beginning to emerge in the velvet twilight. You hear the faint whisper of leaves in the wind, the occasional call of a night bird, the distant murmur of water along a stream. The manor is quiet, yet alive with the subtle pulse of existence. You feel your own pulse, steady and slow, and sense the continuity of everything around you. The land, the people, the animals, the very air itself. All has endured, and all endures still, including yourself. You think of the life you have carried, the long marches, the quiet vigilance, the relentless attention to duty, the subtle reckoning of honour and debt. You understand now that life is less about the victories sung of in halls and more about the work that sustains, the small acts that preserve, the patience required to endure. And in this understanding, you feel a strange, gentle relief. There is no triumph, no grandeur, but there is presence, continuity, and the faint, persistent grace of effort observed. The fire flickers, casting long, soft shadows across your face. You lean back, letting the warmth seep into your joints, and the weight of years settle without complaint. Outside, the night stretches in quiet invitation, a reminder that all things move in time, inexorable yet gentle. You feel the slow passage of life through your body, through the manor, through the land, and even through memory itself. There is satisfaction here, in the rhythm of care, in the acknowledgement of effort, in the gentle awareness of having walked the long, deliberate path. The sun has disappeared fully, leaving only the dim afterglow of horizon and the soft, patient light of stars. You remain by the hearth, quiet, present, aware of the long arc of your days. You understand your story not as one of glory won, but of endurance, observation, and persistent care. You feel the subtle satisfaction of a life fully inhabited, of effort quietly acknowledged. and of a world observed with attention that outlasts ambition. And so you sit, the night deepening around the manor, the fire dwindling to embers, and the long evening of a night's life stretching before you. Not loud, not triumphant, not immortalized in tales, but wholly, unmistakably real. In the calm of this twilight, you finally see it. The life you have lived is measured not in banners or battles, but in the quiet, persistent, and deeply human effort to exist, to endure, and to care. The horizon darkens, and you breathe slowly, content, and fully aware that all of this, the fields, the animals, the manor, your own body, is as it should be. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S., Rich Davis, and Leslie Schofield. Sleep well.